Okay. All right. So welcome to tonight's session about being a charity trustee. It is being recorded, and you will get an email in the next couple of days from Beth, who's my silent partner in the background, supporting me starting off tonight, which will include a copy of the slides that I'm going to use, some attachments. I'll talk about those as we go through, and then you'll have a link to the recording. So if you want to pore over it to your heart's content in the wee hours in the morning when you can't sleep, then that's fine. But also if you want to share it amongst your other trustees in your organization, that's perfectly fine as well. Okay, it's going to be about 2 hours. We'll have a sort of like a 10-minute break around about 8 o'clock, and then hope to finish by about 9. But it all depends on how many questions you get around to asking. That's not a perverse incentive for you not to ask questions. You know, it's your time to ask stuff as we go through. So I think most of you here tonight know a bit about CAN, but we're a local charity based in Poole, but we operate across Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole and the wider Dorset area. We get most of our funding from the local authorities and the local NHS so that we can provide services for free. And we have these 3 parts to the organisation, which is empowering the voluntary sector. And that's my part of the organisation, which mostly gives advice and support to new voluntary organisations and existing ones on being as efficient and as effective as possible. We do that through one-to-one advice and support, through training, through webinars and so on. Then there's the enabling volunteering function, which principally is focused on BCP, because in Dorset, there's Volunteer Centre Dorset that provides that function. So we're there to broker volunteering relationships between those organisations who are looking for volunteers with people who want to be volunteers. But we also support volunteering enabling organisations to recruit and manage their volunteers as effectively as possible. And then connecting communities is about bringing the sector together, learning from each other through peer support and networks, but then also representing their views, I guess, mainly to the local statutory organisations. And what we're trying to do is to create a strong and healthy, diverse, vibrant and flourishing community across Dorset. This is me. I do most of the one-to-one advice and support to organisations that are based in Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. There's someone else in CAN called Becky Stalker, who works with those organisations that are based across the border on the Dorset Council side. And it's a long-term relationship. So actually, if you've got any questions and queries after tonight, you know, you can send me an email or contact me on the phone, and it's always best to use the mobile. That'll go direct to me, whereas the landline will go into the office and then they'll take a message. So, you know, after tonight, you can contact me. And right at the very end slide, there is contact details for Becky as well. So again, if you're on the Dorset Council side, then probably best to go straight to Becky than me. We think it's very important to support and encourage people to be charity trustees. And it's because what you are is a group of people who are working together to make a difference. And when I go through tonight, I will talk about your individual responsibility, but also the responsibility that you have as a group of volunteers, as a group of trustees. So I'll keep on emphasizing that. And it is one of the defining things of the voluntary sector and of charities, is it's people like you who decide that there is an urgent need. Now, each organisation will have a different urgent need, but each of you feels that there is an issue, a problem, a gap that needs to be filled, and you want to spend your time doing that. You're not doing it because you're paid, because you've got to get a job to do it. You're not going to do it because the law says you has, like local authorities or the NHS. You actively decide you want to spend that time and energy doing it. And that's why we feel it's important to give as much advice and support as we can to charity trustees. And one of the ways we do that is by putting on a course like this 3 times a year. But we do other courses. In December, I'm doing one about the role of looking after the finances. Now, that's not aimed at like your treasurers. This is aimed at any charity trustee. A few weeks ago, I did one around safeguarding. So there are other courses that we're putting on throughout the year. So look out for those as they pop up in our newsletters. I think all of you are members, so you'll get newsletters from us at the moment, and they'll be highlighted. If you want to look yourself, then always look on our website on our training page. And this week is Trustees Week. How many of you realised it was Trustees Week this week? Oh, probably not very many, but it's been going for quite a number of years. It's usually this sort of first full week of November, and it's a time to celebrate the work of charity trustees, but also to provide a bit more advice and support to them. And so that's why I always hold one of these during Trustees Week. But the other thing that we've done is we've launched a survey for trustees to get a better idea of who they are and what they do, how much time and effort they put into the charities that they are a trustee for, but also to get a better idea about what advice and training and information you want to carry out your role. Now, the organisation main contact has been sent a link for that. It's about 10 minutes online survey, but Beth, when she does her email to you, will also put the link in. So I'd encourage you to fill that in and also ask your other trustees to do so. Okay. So you're here to find out about being a charity trustee. Well, if I have to put it in a single sentence, it's this: always act in the best interests of your charity and its beneficiaries. And to be honest, if that's the one thing you take away from tonight, and every time you're asked to make a decision in your charity, you can justify that you made that decision because it was in the best interest of your charity and its beneficiaries, you'd be fine, even if you get it wrong. So sometimes charities do get it wrong and they get their wrists slapped by the Charity Commission. It might even go to court, very, very rarely. But even so, courts and the Charity Commission will, if they've got evidence and they understand that at the time you made that decision, you thought it was in the best interests of your charity and its beneficiaries, they'll say, okay, you got it wrong, but don't do it again and learn from it so doesn't happen again, and it's fine. So I am going to do a bit about I suppose the possible liability of charity trustees later on, but basically nobody has really been punished by the courts or by the Charity Commission unless it's dead obvious that they did something knowingly wrong. Okay. But you're here for 2 hours, so I'm going to expand on this sentence a bit more to give you sort of like meat to the bones of it. And this is what I'm going to try and cover. So what is a charity? Because if you're a charity trustee, well, what are you in charge of? What you do, what is a trustee and what they do, legal responsibilities, possible liabilities, a bit about being an effective trustee, help and support. Hopefully that will cover most of what you put down. I think we asked on the booking form for a few sentences about what you're looking for, and I think most of what people put down will cover tonight. Some you'll probably have some very, very detailed, explicit questions, and that's probably best to contact me outside the meeting. But across tonight, it's going to be very broad brush, but do stop and ask me questions at any point in time. I'll try and answer them, or I'll say, well, we'll do that later, or I might suggest let's talk outside the meeting. But it's your time, so if you've got a burning question, don't just keep it to yourself. Okay, so we'll start off. What's a charity? Would anybody like to give me some ideas about what makes a charity a charity? Oh, come on, stunned silence. There must be one or two of you who are quite happy to sort of throw something into the ring.
Something that you don't want to make a profit on.
Okay, so when you mean a profit, what do you mean by a profit?
Um, it's not a commercial venture. It has so the profit would be doing good
Okay, so I think
rather
what you're
than monetary.
yeah, I think you've got two things there. Two things there I'd pick out. One is you're not doing it to make money, not for a commercial reason. I think I picked that up earlier. You're all here because your charity is meeting some sort of urgent need in society and the environment. Okay, but secondly, is what happens if you make a surplus? If you end up with more money at the end of the year, you know, in the private sector, we call that a profit, don't we? That you've actually got more income than expenditure. And what happens in a charity is that doesn't get given out to like your shareholders or given not necessarily given out as a performance related pay, but actually what happens is it goes back into the organization to do more of the good that the organization was set up for. Okay, anyone else want to say what makes a charity a charity?
It's an organisation recognised by the charity commissioners certainly once it gets to a certain size.
Okay, first half was correct, that actually yes, there's what being a charity is charity in law, but actually there are loads of charities that are not registered. So
yep, that's what I was meaning by saying once your size is over a certain amount, you have to be registered.
No. There are lots of charities that are unregistered charities because they are too small. Okay.
That's what I just said. If you're over a certain size.
No, what I'm saying is that those smaller organisations are charities in law.
Yeah. I think we're saying the same thing, just using different words.
Okay. All right. Anyone else want to say what makes a charity a charity? Okay, I will not. So it's something exclusively for charitable purposes. Now that's important because not everything that's good for the community is necessarily charitable. It's well established in English law what is charitable and not is charitable. I'll come back to these in a minute. And also operates for the public benefit. And the public benefit is that charities must produce a benefit for wider than a select few. And it operates under the jurisdiction of the High Court, either subject to the laws of England and Wales. And just for you to know that, I don't think any of you are going to be big mega charities, but charity law is different in Scotland and Northern Ireland. So the Charity Commission for England and Wales is there because it regulates it according to English and Welsh law, whereas there are slightly different rules and laws and regulators in Scotland and Northern Ireland. So if any of you grow to the size that you want to start operating in those kingdoms, then you have to actually probably end up registering and following the charity laws of those two countries. Generally they are the same, but there are some subtle differences, as there ever are amongst the United Kingdom. Now, this thing about charitable purposes, there are some things that are not charitable. Can anybody think of anything that's not charitable that would be good for the community, but necessarily not charitable? All right, what about allotments? What about credit unions?
Because they said individuals. I was just thinking of an allotment.
Yes, yeah. Actually, you're on the right tracks here. Yeah, is that there is a fine line between membership benefits and public benefits. And credit unions, although you think they're very good because they're providing very easy loans, usually for people on low incomes, not exclusively, but certainly in England and Wales, they tend to be aimed at people who can't usually very easily get affordable loans and might end up having to go and use loan sharks. And you would think, oh, that's great, that should be charitable. But actually, English law says, in fact, it's just restricted to their members. And similarly for allotments. Allotments can't be charities in law because they're providing a benefit only to a limited number and not to the wider public. And there is also a subtle difference about the numbers of people. So, for instance, there's been a cause célèbre in the last few years about the exclusive Plymouth Brethren. So, I guess an English-based Christian church, been around since the 17th century. But you almost have to be born into the church to be a member of the church. And the Charity Commission was withdrawing its charitable status because it said it wasn't producing any public benefit. It was a very sort of closed shop. And the only way that the Plymouth Brethren, exclusive Plymouth Brethren, have maintained that is, for instance, by them advertising their services to the wider public, for instance, and a few other bits and pieces as well. So you have to be aware about some things are charitable, some things aren't. One big thing is party politics, and also education that is not balanced. So there have been some organisations that have had their charity status turned down or in fact revoked because they're too associated with a particular political party, and or the educational work that they've done is biased towards one view. So the charitable rules on educational work is that you must give a balanced view so that the learner can make a considered decision about what to do. Now, what's important about public benefit is you as charity trustees have always got to keep an eye on both of these two, actually. That one, that actually your charity is only doing exclusively charitable purposes. It can't do a bit of non-charity, or has to be exclusively charitable, or else you risk losing your charitable status. You risk any of the tax advantages that your charity has. So sometimes you might need to ask, when you're asked decisions about a new piece of work or even existing work, is one, is this charitable or not charitable? Most of the time it'll be pretty obvious. Might be some times when actually it's a bit grey, and you need to assure yourselves that actually it is charitable. And secondly is about the public benefit that's being created. Is it being too restricted? So for instance, if you are charging for services, and the Charity Commission thinks that you are charging more than a lot of people can afford to pay, then they may question the way you're running your charity, because you're basically, in a sense, restricting the benefits of your charity on the ability to pay. Don't get started on private schools. That's been a sort of ongoing question within the charity world for a long time, and even the Charity Commission. And basically, it's been put back to central government to do. It has to clarify the laws on public benefit. Nobody's touched that nettle for many years. So you need to be aware of these two principles, that you are doing exclusively charitable purposes and it operates for the public benefit. If you do have a worry or a concern, come and ask us. We can give you an initial opinion. If we think it's very, very complicated, you might need to go and get a charity lawyer, but generally it's very easy to pick up, because these charities exist to make a difference, to create public benefit. That's why your charity exists. And when you get this slide, Charity Commission likes all trustees to have a look at what makes a charity CC4. So if you want to look at this in more detail, then there'll be the hyperlink when you get these slides. But we do have a regulator, the police force, which is the Charity Commission. and the charity commission's got to be sent certain information. So you have you basically have to update your public register, which is on the web. Does anybody know roughly how many registered charities there are in England and Wales? Okay, it's about 170,000. And people go, wow, it's a lot more than I thought. But actually, nearly 50% of them have an income of less than £10,000. So most registered charities are pretty small. And even when you get to the biggies, when you start to think of the big nationals, they are in the minority. And that actually about 95% of all charities have got an income of less than 100,000. So most charities are pretty small. So they're almost like in the small corner shop type thing. If you look at private sector businesses, most businesses are like, one person band shops, for instance, or sole traders. But each of those registered charities, you have to keep the public register up to date. So you have to keep your web pages with information about who your trustees are, contact details up to date as soon as possible. And you just log on and do it yourself. So the expectation is that it's kept up to date. But also you have to send reports in. And it depends what sort of charity you are, whether you send in your accounts or not. And there are special rules for that. So you need to ask whoever in your organization does that to make sure that you're following the rules about what information has got to be sent to the Charity Commission. Charities must cooperate. So if the Charity Commission does ask questions of a charity, you are legally obliged to do so, and it was contempt of court if you do not. Some trustees were actually found guilty of that about 3 years ago, which was the case law, first bit of case law where it actually was tested. And then they can actually issue official warnings. They can tell you to stop doing something or to do something. And they can disqualify people from being a trustee or senior employee if they've done some seriously wrong things. And then they can carry out statutory inquiries, which is what you don't really want them to get into, because then that becomes public. So as soon as they start a statutory inquiry, there are probably 2 of these a month. No, actually a bit more than that. There are about a couple of hundred each year. And it becomes public notice about which charity is being investigated and why. And then at the end of it, they produce a report. And it's available for anybody to access and look at. Sometimes people feel a bit worried by the Charity Commission. I have to say they've gone into dips and troughs. 15, 20 odd years ago, they were very friendly, very approachable. Then when they had massive cuts, they became much more offhand, regulatory. The last couple of years, they've invested back more into giving advice and support to people. And so they try to help as much as they can. So don't be put off about them. But what's great about them is they maintain charities' confidence in the public, from public confidence, because if they do become aware of wrongdoing, then they will get involved and they carry out these official warnings and statutory inquiries. And regularly, every couple of years, they do these polls, surveys of the public around trust and confidence. And charities usually come up, they ask people to score between, 0 and 10. And charities usually come in the top 3, quite often with people in the NHS. Some of the things I still find quite surprising. Banks, 5.6, a lot of people I talk to don't feel that. But I think what's always useful is to see that actually MPs and government ministers always come right at the bottom of the list of this. So when you see, MPs or charity ministers pontificating about charities and what they should and shouldn't be doing and how they should be doing it, actually it's quite good sometimes to remember that actually the public has a lot more confidence in charities, what they do and what they say, than maybe they do elected members. So it's good to have the Charity Commission there so they can actually weed out, no, this is me mixing my metaphors. I was about to say weed out the bad apples, but to, pick out the bad apples and stop the rest of the sector being affected. So it's great that it does exist to do that. Okay, does anybody want to ask me about what makes a charity a charity? No? Okay. As I said, I've spent that time doing that because you need to make sure your charity always maintains its legality as a charity. So who is a trustee? Well, basically, if there is a committee at the top of your organization, anyone who sits on it and has a vote is going to be a charity trustee. Okay. So anybody who comes to your meetings, whatever you call it, trustee meetings, board meetings, committee meetings, advisory meetings, or whatever. But if actually there's nobody else that committee reports to, anyone who has a vote around the table is going to be a charity trustee. And it doesn't matter whether they're called that or not. But if they've got a vote, they will be a charity trustee and they will have those legal roles and responsibilities. And the law this is where the word trustee comes from. It's about trust law. So it's to use the charity's resources for its charitable purposes and to always act in its best interests. So again, you can see that my basic principle right at the beginning is reflected in that phrase. And the basic duty of a trustee is to ensure the charity is well run. So you're as efficient and as effective as possible. You're getting as much public benefit out of the work of the charity as possible. That's what it's looking for. And that it's solvent. Okay, like any organization, you need to have enough money and assets to cover any of your debts and liabilities. But I think it goes a bit further for charities. If Wilco goes bust, okay, there'll be several thousand workers who will be out of a job, and that might have impact on them. And a lot of us who loved Wilco will think, oh God, where am I going to get my cheap paper from, or cheap kitchen stuff? But in charity law, trustees are expected to think about the impact on the people or those they're looking after. I should have explained earlier about this word beneficiaries. Not all charities benefit people. Can people think of any charities that actually their beneficiaries are not going to be people?
Animal charities.
Animal charities.
Yeah, obvious one are animal charities, for instance. Their beneficiaries are going to be animals.
Environmental.
And environmental.
Increasingly.
Yeah, and environmental increasingly. So they might be looking at different aspects, it might be part of the environment or the whole of the environment. National Trust, who are their beneficiaries?
Buildings.
Yeah, buildings and land. So that's why sometimes people feel, why does the Charity Commission use this phrase beneficiaries rather than people? And it's because there are so many charities where people is not the appropriate word to use. So about being solvent is that if you do close, that you close in a planned way, because some charities are actually working either with very vulnerable environments or very vulnerable people. And if they close like tomorrow, well, actually Wilco wasn't that sudden, was it? But some companies have closed down very quickly. Actually, sometimes that won't have immediate impact on people or things, whereas charity trustees are expected to think about what the impact of their charity might be closing down. So therefore, they've got to think about solvents and a planned closure. And the third one is working towards its charitable purpose. I'll come to this in a moment because this is a very important thing for you to go away with tonight, is to clearly understand what your charity's charitable purpose is. As I said, I'll cover that a bit later. Bad news is, I suppose, the buck stops with you. You have to take the ultimate responsibility as charity trustees, but you share that equally amongst yourself. That's a good thing and a bad thing. So actually people shouldn't feel that they're lonely in taking that responsibility. The other thing is that actually you as a charity board might have to monitor your other charity trustees to make sure that they're not doing their own thing and making the decision just on themselves and then pull you all down. So it is a collective responsibility. Okay. But as I said, and I'm going to cover this later, it's going to be very, very, very rare that actually any ultimate responsibility will come back to you as a group of trustees or as individuals, as long as you've always acted in good faith and always worked in made decisions in the best interests of your charity and the beneficiaries. It'll only come down hard if it could be shown that you knowingly acted against the interests of the charity and your beneficiaries. Okay, I'm going to work through these six duties. Now, Charity Commission expects charity trustees to have read this document, which is the Essential Trustee What You Need to Know, CC3. And again, this will be a live hyperlink when you get it, or you could just search for it online. It's about, don't be put off. If you download it, it's about 50 pages, but actually it's not very dense text. There's lots of spaces. It's quite readable. But they expect you to read through it. And if you're not sure about anything, to ask someone, ask someone else in your charity, said you can come and talk to us at CAN. So that's a good thing to look at. There is quite a good summary from the Charity Commission, which is a trustee welcome pack. So there's a link there which sort of summarizes it. And something I haven't put on this page that they've done in the last couple of years, even they've now produced these things that are called 5-minute reads. There's a link on the last page of the slides. There's one about safeguarding, one about making decisions, one about looking after finances, and so on. And they're sort of like have 5-minute reads, but also have a little short video with them as well. And they go over these duties. So they talk about this. CC3 talks about these 6 duties. And I'm going to go through them one by one, and probably we'll get to I'll probably get through halfway through these before we have a break, but it'll be around about 8 o'clock. As I said, butt in at any time. So the first one is ensure your charity is carrying out its purposes for the public benefit. So it's knowing what your charity can and can't do within its purposes and its charitable purposes or the objects. Now, every charity will have somewhere at the beginning of its constitution or its articles, its rules, something like the objects clause. If there's only one thing you know by heart in your charity's constitutional rules, it's the objects clause. Now, this is the objects for some of the trustees that are here tonight. Does anybody recognize this as being their objects? Or even guess who it's theirs? Okay, you might be very new trustees, but this is the objects for Hammersley Homes. Okay. One of the things you as charity trustees need to be aware of is your charity object. So if you're ever asked to do something new, you need to ask yourselves, can we do this within your charity objects? And you need to feel confident that you can do it within the objects, because one of the big no-nos is to use the assets of your charity for something outside your charitable objects. If you want to do something outside your objects, you must not do it unless you get your objects changed. Now, the objects can be changed. There's a bit of a bureaucratic process and you have to get the Charity Commission approval to do so, but you can change them. But you need to always be aware of these charitable objects for charitable purposes. So even if it's good for the community, you can't do it. So for instance, what was quite not unsurprising is when we had Afghan refugees coming in a couple of years ago, when Ukrainian refugees came a couple of years ago. An awful lot of people wanted to do fundraising or activities or send stuff off to help either, organisations working with refugees in the UK or for helping those abroad. But the Charity Commission pointed out that unless your charity can do that with its objects, however charitable it might be and how much worthwhile it is, it would be illegal for you to do so. Okay. So they're aware that sometimes, we want to, you're mostly here because you want to do something good for the community. But actually you must be aware of what your charity can and cannot do within its charitable objects. And it is quite a common thing that I see, is that charities over the years sometimes start to do stuff which they think is perfectly good. It probably is charitable in law, but actually it is outside their objects. Okay. And you would lose any challenge from the Charity Commission or even a member of the public for spending time, effort, money, staff, resources, volunteers on that work if it was outside your objects. Does anybody want to ask me a question at that point? Just think this is quite an important fundamental thing that you need to be aware of.
Is it can I just ask, is it advisable to put your constitution on your website, or is that just between trustees? Or
well, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. I think
Okay.
it's a public document. Actually, people can send a freedom of information request to the Charity Commission for any charity's governing document, and the Charity Commission will automatically send it back. It's been said that that's an adequate thing. I don't see why it needs to be kept private. And certainly the objects is in the public domain, because when you go onto the public register, every single charity's objects will be there anyway. So if you go to the Hammersley homepage, it will give you the names of their trustees, address and contact details, and it'll also say what the charity objects are. So I'll mention about the Constitution, your governing document, in a minute. Anyone else? Nope. Okay. And then I think you as trustees need to be able to, if someone asks you, well, what does your charity do? It'll be great for you, rather than go and ah about it, maybe to at least know what you're doing to fulfill its purposes and how you're benefiting the public. And I suggest it's always good, rather than you being a bit stumped and maybe we're not always good wordsmiths, is you as a charity to come up with a few sentences that everyone can use, that if you're ever asked that question, and about what difference your charity is really making. And this is tested every year, because every registered charity should be producing a trustee's annual report. And one of the things in that trustee's annual report is not only the bums on seats type information, the number of people we saw, or the number of hectares of land that we improved, or the number of fish that we saved, or the number of works of art that we preserved and put on display. Is the so what question. What's the difference? What that's happened because of that activity? And as I said, you're expected to do that in a written way every year in the trustee's annual report. Now, someone might someone might draft that for you, but it comes to the trustees for them to sign off on. So the next one is comply with your charity's governing document and the law. So again, this phrase governing document, it could be called a constitution. If you're a charitable company, it will be called articles of association. Some other charities might have something called rules, but it's the governing document. So it's being familiar with your governing document. Although I said, knowing the objects is the one thing you should know, but you should have a pretty good idea about how the rest of it will lay down, who can and cannot be a trustee, how meetings are called, how decisions are made, conflict of interest, what benefits trustees can and cannot get, that sort of stuff. And you might have been given it. You hopefully should have been given a copy of it when you became a charity trustee, but you might lose it. Even if you get posted it or emailed, it might be buried somewhere. So I do suggest, Nina, put it on your website. Then it's good. If you've got a website, then your charity trustees have got easy access to it rather than having to trawl through maybe a whole lot of papers or even emails. So it's there, and do review it again. I've worked with charities over the years where accepted practice, like how we run meetings, how we do AGMs, have become the accepted way of doing it. But actually, if you look at the governing document, it's not how they should be done at all, and therefore probably makes all those decisions, all those meetings null and void. So it's your Bible.
So the governing document is separate to your constitution?
No, that's what it
Or
is. No, so governing document is that phrase that will cover things like constitution, rules. There are some people here who are charitable companies, so it's called articles of association. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. It says you have to send things back to the charity commission, so you have to be up to date with filing accounts. Now, all CIOs, charitable incorporated, they have to send all their accounts in. Other charities only have to send their accounts in if their income is more than 25,000 a year. And every charity, when their income does go over 25,000 a year, do have to have an independent examination undertaken. I won't go into these. Are queries and questions you might need to take away, or you might want to come back and ask me more about. It's your collective responsibility to make sure that all happens. The Charity Commission now did about 6 years ago. They actually did a deep dive into charities that were late in filing their accounts and for reasons why. And you got some of the silly ones, like these are literal. The pet ate the accounts. I was driving down the motorway and the boot came open, and all the accounts fell out the back, which are obvious ones. But other ones, you feel perhaps, well, one was, oh, we thought the treasurer did this. That's not accepted by the Charity Commission. We thought the accountant was doing this. That's not accepted. Or the accountant basically took too long. That was not accepted by the Charity Commission as an excuse. And even the treasurer dying, and we couldn't get access to the accounts, was not an acceptable excuse to the Charity Commission. So they're saying that it's a collective responsibility, and you as charity trustees need to have some ways of having duplicates available, so you don't get into that hassle and problem. And you have to be aware of other laws that apply to a charity. Okay, anybody got some suggestions about, besides charity law, what other sort of laws have you got to be aware of that might have an impact on the way you run your charity?
Contract law, HR.
Yep, HR, all the employment staff, contract law, if you've got, service contracts with people. Any other ones?
Conflicts of interest.
Oh, sorry, what was that?
Conflicts of interests.
Yes, conflicts of interest will tend to be more covered by charity law and company law. But yes, and you need to be very much aware of that as well. I think somebody else was saying
health and safety.
Yeah, a whole thing about health and safety. And that's health and safety for employees, but also for the public as well. Okay, there are plenty of other laws. Data protection, safeguarding. But you're not expected to be an expert. Everyone recognizes that, you aren't paid to do this. You might have very little experience of, running and employing people, but you're expected to take reasonable steps to find out. So it's know where the limits of your knowledge are. You might try and get some expertise in by, employing someone, or having a volunteer expert on tap, or maybe even having a trustee with that area of expertise. But actually, if you don't have that immediately within an organization, then, you should reach out to try and find out how you need to comply with some of these basic laws. Generally, I again say, well, come and see us. We can deal with most stuff. And if it's more complicated, then we'll just refer you on. But you need to ask that question. You know, I'm going to say quite often, you're a critical friend. You need to ask those questions. You know, can we do this? Do we know how to do this properly and legally? If we don't know, who should we go and ask? Who can we get this information from? Who can help us? Third one is act in your charity's best interests. So you as an individual trustee and as a group of trustees are expected to make balanced, informed decisions. And that means you basically getting the information you need. So if someone's doing it verbally or they've written down some ideas and pros and cons, you need to feel that actually everything's been explored and that you certainly understand what the options are and what the pros and cons are. And then you can decide what you think is in the best interest of the charity. And as long as you've done that and that's recorded, how do you record your meetings, your decisions?
Minutes.
Take minutes.
Minutes, yes, minutes are vitally important. Now, so and again, if the Charity Commission come in and say we've had a complaint about a decision that was made, they will ask you for evidence of that, and they will expect to see minutes of the trustee meeting where it was being discussed. And what they'll be looking for is that there's a clear summary of pros and cons and why you chose option A over option B, for instance. Doesn't need to be War and Peace. It just needs to be a clear summary and a clear rationale, reasoning about why you chose that one, option A over option B, for instance. And it's also about being prepared to question and challenge. Okay. And I'm going to say later on, I think one of the most important characters of a good trustee is being prepared to ask the seemingly stupid question. I know we don't like to do that, but actually, you know, it's a good skill and to be brave enough to ask those questions. The other one is about accepting majority decisions. That's enshrined in charity law, probably more than nowhere else. So that actually, if there has been a decision made properly at a meeting of charity trustees, all the trustees have to go along and support it. As soon as they go outside the meeting, they shouldn't try and undermine it, and certainly not openly and publicly. If they're not happy with it, they should walk, basically. If they think it was illegal, then they should whistle blow to the Charity Commission and then maybe to another regulator. Usually it's going to be the police quite often, because usually it's going to involve some sort of criminal activity. But basically, you can't just stay as a trustee and work against the majority decision. And I have to say, even, I'm sure you've all had this, I want it minuted that I voted against this. Well, actually, it doesn't mean anything at the end of the day. If you carry on being a charity trustee, you're basically saying, I'm happy with what the charity is doing by remaining to be a charity trustee, and therefore I'm accepting equal responsibility with all my other charity trustees.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
We've just got this problem at the moment with the charity that we're running. There's a conflict of interest because of the fees that are being charged for hire.
Yeah.
And I think I did actually drop an email to you, saying that in the in the committee, the majority of them are hirers of the building.
Yeah.
So we've been told that means we have to step back and we can't make a decision because we've got a conflict of interest. But
it's more subtle. It's more subtle than that. Okay. So when people are in a trustee meeting, they must act individually in the best interest of the charity, and not for any organisation that they might be party of. And they have to be aware of that duty, or else they could open themselves up to individual liability and responsibility. Secondly, if it's hiring that is applicable to everyone, just because you're a hirer doesn't exclude you from being involved in that decision. Because like you're a community centre, most community
Mm.
centres over, decades. Most trustees have actually been there because they've been, voted in or elected from amongst the hirers, the members.
Mhm.
And that's been accepted, that as long as the hiring charges are for the same for everyone, then actually that's not a direct conflict of interest. But they've got to be reminded, of course, that their responsibility is to make sure that the charity is solvent, and that it's the way it's also got to appear to the outside world, that actually they don't all vote on block to keep, to keep the charity fees, the hiring fees down as low as possible. But probably it's better for us to have a conversation, a bit more detail outside of tonight.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah,
that you,
that'd be
Nina?
lovely. Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay. All right. I'll be in contact with you, Nina. Okay.
Thank you.
I'm recognising India conflict of interest. Sorry, these H1s are going to be the handouts you get with more detail. So there will always be conflicts of interest. Some will be more serious than others, and this H5 will talk about actually the Charity Commission definition of conflicts of interest. In most cases, people think it's about there being some material gain. You get a salary, or there's you might get gifts, or you might get equipment or something like that. That's direct conflict of interest. But there's also conflict of loyalty. So it's about where you won't gain financially or materially from any decision, but actually it's maybe because you're part of another organization, or even you have a personal relationship with someone that might be seen to affect your ability to make a objective decision in the best interest of the charity. So I think I always say it's the tabloid test. So if, because of your connection with an organization or an individual, or a decision that the charity is going to make that could be seen to benefit you directly or indirectly, and that if the Echo got hold of it and can make a story of it, then probably it's best for you to declare that interest and then manage it. Okay, because as I said, conflict of interest is inevitable. It's the way you manage it. So the easiest way of managing it is how? What's the easiest way of managing a conflict of interest on a decision at a trustee committee meeting?
Question it.
Sorry?
Question it.
You question it, yes, but this is about managing it. Yeah, questioning it would hopefully clarify exactly what the conflict of interest is and how serious it is. But if you've identified that there could be a conflict of interest, what's the easiest way of managing that person's conflict of interest?
That particular trustee to step out of the meeting and not be involved in the decision-making process.
Yeah, that's the easiest and cleanest way of doing it. So, and your minutes should clearly record that. Say that Joan had this conflict because she's a member of this group, and if we gave them a contract, then that she won't benefit materially, but actually the organization would benefit, and that could appear to be a conflict of loyalty. Therefore, she stepped outside of the meeting. Then you do the minute about the decision that was made. You record the decision, and then the minutes will say that Joan came back in for the next item. That's a very clear trail. Yeah. Anyway, but H5 expands on that a bit. But it is about don't bury your head in the sand. A lot of charities end up spending an awful lot of time with malicious complaints where people have got it in for the charity. They'll try and put the knife in and then twist it. And if they've got anything about, well, so and so shouldn't have been at that meeting because they live with that person's son or something like that, to basically give the idea that actually that decision wasn't being made in the best interests of the charity and its beneficiaries. And also ensuring that trustee benefits are allowed. So there are some things that charity law does allow. So it's perfectly legal to give charity trustees reasonable expenses of carrying out their role of a trustee. So travel, carer costs. If you have trustees, who might have to come a long way from the meeting, they might have to stay overnight. So those sorts of expenses are reasonable, are allowable in charity law. But some things you can do, but they must be in your governing document, so your constitution or articles of association. So there will be a section in that document that will be very clear about what trustee benefits can and cannot have. Okay. So one clear thing, one quite common one, doesn't have to be there, but one very common one is that trustees cannot be employees of the charity. And there is this rule of connected persons. So we're not just talking about trustees here, but we're talking about close family members. And it goes up, so it's parents, grandparents. It goes down, so it's children and grandchildren. And it goes sideways, so your siblings and their partners. And it also covers partners. And that means those in a marriage, civil partnership, and it's now been accepted that actually also people who are living together in a long-term relationship. So for instance, check your governing document, and if it says that trustee can't be employed, that means you can't employ a partner of a trustee, or a child of a trustee, or a parent of a trustee, unless you follow whatever rules there might be in your constitution and rules. So you must check it and follow it to the letter. If you get it wrong, then again, if someone finds out, complains to the Charity Commission, Charity Commission will ask that and say, no, that was illegal benefits, and therefore they've got to be paid back. So make sure you understand about any individual benefits that charity trustees can have. Very old, I don't think I've seen one, but very old Victorian type things said that trustees couldn't be beneficiaries, for instance. No, they couldn't benefit from the trustee at all. They couldn't make use of any of the services. But most modern constitutions in the last 50 years have said that charity trustees can be beneficiaries of the charity. But again, you need to look at exactly what's in your governing document. And it's not about preserving the charity for its own sake. In a sense, if you think it through, if your urgent need gets filled, that nobody has to use a food bank, that actually dolphins don't have to be looked after, that works of art don't have to be preserved, because they're all being preserved, then actually your charity's out of a job, and therefore it should close down. For most of us, that's not going to happen in our lifetimes, probably, unfortunately, very sadly. But it is one of the things to think about, is it's not preserving for its own sake. And actually some charity governance experts say, every year charity trustees should just say, actually, are we still needed? Or would it be better for us to close down, or better for us to merge with another charity? So it's just thrown out there that actually sometimes you might need to actually ask this existential question, are we still needed? Do we still need to be here? And it's obviously not about serving personal interests. Okay, it's 8 o'clock. I promised you a break. So could we come back at 10 past? Yep. Okay, great. Okay, right. So we're on to managing your charity's resources responsibly. So this is about basically, obviously, anything your charity has. So cash, equipment, some of you might have a building or even a vehicle. And and obviously people, and that could be paid staff, that could be volunteers. So, you know, buck stops with you. So you've got to manage those as well as possible. But you might be delegating that in some way. So you need to have policies and procedures to look after the money, to look after the building and insurance and so on, to look after your volunteers, to look after your staff. And then maybe other people are doing that. So, but you need to sign off on those and feel that actually, you know, it's best practice, some cases that it's legal and so on. But it's your responsibility to make sure that everyone in the organisation knows how it should be done. And that's why you have written policies and procedures. So it's clear for everyone that you have consistency. And also, if you're ever challenged and going wrong, that you can say, well, this is the policy. We told Jim, this is how it should be done. He decided not to follow that. So actually, it's mostly his fault, not ours. Getting the resources your charity needs. Now, again, it depends how big a charity you are. If you are not only charity trustees, but active volunteers doing the day-to-day stuff, you might end up having to do grant applications, that you might end up doing the community fundraising and the shaking of the tins and so on. But actually, at the end of the day, charity trustees' responsibility is about knowing clearly how much money you need to operate for the year and how it's going to be spent. So that's about you agreeing a budget at the beginning of the year and then actually monitoring how that's being done. That's really what a charity trustee's role is. The doing of it, the getting of the money, and even the spending of the money might be being done by other people. And as I said, you know, for larger organizations like CAN, you know, most of that's being done by staff. But for smaller charities, it might be volunteers. And some of those volunteers might also be you as charity trustees. I'll talk about twin hatters in a minute. And it's about having and following appropriate controls and procedures, and that refers back to the sort of managing risks and so on. Just for you to be aware that there are special rules about land and buildings, and it's about anything that involves a sale or a lease of more than 7 years. Probably for a lot of you, it's not, you don't have to worry about it, but just log that away, that if there's going to be something around land and buildings, that you need to find out what the special rules are for charities. As I said, you've got responsibility for and to staff and volunteers. And again, one of the little nuggets for you to go away is that unfortunately you have to treat staff and volunteers differently. You mustn't end up giving the impression that volunteers are staff and have the rights of employees. There have been a number of occasions where people have gone to employment tribunals from volunteers, and they have successfully proven to the tribunal that in fact they were treated as staff and therefore they have employment rights. So, for instance, you can't have a grievance policy for volunteers. You've got to have some sort of, you know, complaints and issues policy. You can't use that term grievance, and you can't use the term disciplinary for volunteers either. So just be aware sometimes for you as trustees, if you're talking about, you know, your volunteers and volunteer policy, just ask that question, you know, are we making sure that we aren't treating them as if they are paid staff? If you're unsure about that, if you're in BCP, then talk to the Volunteer Hub. If you're in Dorset Council area, then talk to the Volunteer Centre Dorset. They'll help you to sort of manage that fine line between staff and volunteers. Next one is act with reasonable care and skill. The good news is actually, as I said, you're not expected to have any specialist skills and experience. Basically, those that you would use for managing your own affairs is fine. Okay, so you don't have to go and do loads of training or get some qualifications or whatever. Just use what you would do for managing your own affairs is good enough, except if you are a professional. So and you advertise yourself, and that usually means it's either going to be someone who's an accountant or an HR professional or a solicitor. And it's about making use of those professional skills in the trustee meetings. You know, you might say, oh, by the way, I know that this is a dodgy bit of HR. We need to get some expert advice and support. Okay. Because I think in the same way, I guess you would feel this, if you found out that someone was treating their employees illegally, and they found out there was an HR professional on their board of trustees who basically didn't say anything at all, you'd probably think that's a bit weird, a bit strange, and that's not that person acting reasonably. And similarly, Charity Commission and the courts would think the same. So it has to be where people have got, you know, a professional standing qualification, and they are known to have that. You know, if there was a solicitor who trained, you know, 40 odd years ago and never became a solicitor and they went into something else, that wouldn't count. It's where people are actually carrying out that role in their working life. But it is about deciding when you need advice, you know, knowing the limits of your knowledge and then going and asking for that. As I said, most cases come to us, ask us. We could probably deal with most of those queries. And if we don't know, we'll tell you very clearly that you need to go and get this particular professional advice. And it's going to be maybe from an HR professional, if it's around working with staff, or if it's some sort of really nerdy bit of charity law, then it'll be a charity solicitor, or it might be an accountant, but again, the charity accountant. It's about preparing for meetings. So being a charity trustee is not just to be there to warm the seat for the hour-and-a-half meeting or 2-hour meeting, but actually taking some time out to prepare and think. So good practice, of course, is that you should be sent agenda, maybe some papers beforehand, and those papers are very clear about what decisions need to be made so that individuals can think about it before they turn up for that meeting. And it's about making sure you've got the information you need, financial and management. You know, earlier on, I said you're about making considered decisions. So you need to have the right set of information. And if you haven't got it, don't be afraid to ask for it. And if the decision isn't vital to be made at that meeting, is then to put it off whilst that additional information is found and sent around to people. Always about being prepared in case things go wrong. Each charity, you know, is going to have their own sort of risk about, you know, if you're doing work that might end up potentially damaging people, you know, because you're working with vulnerable people, you know, something might go wrong with them. You might be looking after sensitive art material. You know, think about when there could be there's a strong likelihood something might go wrong, and therefore have a bit of a plan ready for it. And again, it depends whether that's back of a fag packet or some very long, complicated. But just, you know, think about, you know, what should we be prepared for, and what can we put in place if things go wrong. To be honest, actually, the Charity Commission does expect all charities to think about appropriate insurance, because obviously that is one thing that you can put in place if things go wrong, is that, you know, if there is a financial loss, that actually you're covered by insurance. So, you know, it's recommended that charity trustees ask that question ideally every year, at the most maybe every 2 or 3 years. Just ask that question, you know, have we talked to a broker about that we've all got we have the right level of insurance in place, so you don't left in a position where you're going to be underinsured. And then therefore the charity is going to lose out because you're going to have to pay for stuff out of the charity's assets rather than the insurance company. And ensure your charity is accountable. So it's about meeting legal, accounting, and reporting requirements. So, you know, I made a couple of comments about what things have got to be sent to the Charity Commission, and there are rules for that. And if you're not sure, ask someone in your charity what the rules are. Come and ask me. If you can't find the information that you want from within your own charity. And it's about being able to show that your charity complies with the law and is effective. Earlier on, I talked about the importance of minutes. That's a good way of showing how decisions were made and why. and also why it's important to have written policies and procedures. A lot of people think, oh God, having to look at having to have a long written policy in place and no one's going to read it and use it. What's the point? Well, it's again a bit like insurance. We all take out insurance, probably never ever use it, but we think we'd better have it just in case. Same is true about having written policies and procedures in place, so that actually if anything does go wrong, you've got some evidence to show that actually you had thought about how things should be being done, but maybe staff or volunteers didn't do it. So actually it's their call rather than the charity trustees. Some of you, depending on how you're set up, will have members that you are accountable to. So your governing document will talk about members and who they are. For some organisations, your only members might be your charity trustees, nobody else. But for other organisations, you might have a wider group of members. So again, your governing document will be very clear about actually what you have to do with those members. So quite common, it's obviously about having an AGM and actually having your charity trustees, maybe all or some of them being elected by the members. But it's also about, others that have an interest in the charity, your donors, your supporters, and actually anybody that you work with to help deliver your services, because some of you probably work in partnership with others. And obviously working on also your accountability to the people that you work and support. So you just need to be thinking about that sometimes. And obviously making sure that staff and volunteers are accountable to the board. You can get into that sad situation where you've got the board over one side and then the staff and the volunteers are doing their own thing. And actually they feel there's a real disconnect. And it's very clear that staff and volunteers are accountable to the board. So you need to work out a way that they report regularly and that actually trustees are making decisions. They're not rubber stamping any of the proposals, for instance, that might come from a chief exec or a manager or staff or volunteers. That actually it's the trustees who are making decisions in the end. And I always put this in, it's about working accountability as an opportunity, not a burden. So this looks like it's an awful lot of rules here to follow, but actually it means it maintains that high trust and confidence that we have in the public, because probably all of you, or quite a lot of you, are relying on the public giving you something. They might be giving you money, there's donations and gifts, being involved in community fundraising. They might be volunteering for you. And therefore you've got to maintain a sort of certain high standard of working so that actually you maintain that and you don't face the risk of losing that trust and confidence and then all that support flows away. And it's also about maintaining the tax advantages that we have as charities. Don't pay corporation tax. We can get automatic 80% off our business rates. Any taxpayer who makes a donation, you can claim gift aid. So it's about being able to justify that level of support, but it's also, I think, to show that actually our charity is working for the good of the community, for the environment, for our beneficiaries, rather than being self-centered and working to our own self-interest. So that's a big chunk through those 6 things. You might be thinking, oh my God, that's so complicated. But it's like a lot of things in life. The first time any of you ever got in a car or on a motorbike or even on a bike on the road, and you thought, oh my God, what do all these signs mean? What do all these lines on the road mean? What can I do? What can't I do? And it's something you get by experience, just by doing it. So don't think, tonight you don't feel, oh God, I don't know that in detail. It's about knowing that you need to know a bit more and therefore find out a bit, talk to us, look at some of the resources that I'm going to share with you later on. And then you'll get better, as we all do driving or being on the road, as we do more and more of it. So don't be put off by this as being, very complicated life. Anybody want to ask me at that point before I move on to risks? No. Okay. Obviously, a lot of people sometimes get worried about, well, what's my risks and liability? So good news is, in nearly all cases, financial liability will be met by the charity rather than by you as an individual. And this is a quote from that important publication, CC3, the Essential Trustee, that the Charity Commission recognises that most trustees are volunteers who sometimes make honest mistakes. You're not expected to be perfect, but they're expected to do your best to comply with their duties. And charity law generally protects trustees who have acted honestly and reasonably. And that's what I've talked about, the importance of minutes, the importance of policies and procedures, that actually people take their time seriously and their contributions seriously. And there are only very, very rare cases that trustees may face personal liabilities. And that's when they do something that they knowingly wrong. And I always give the example of paying cash in hand. You as a householder or whatever, if a plumber comes and does a bit of work for you and says, okay, you can either give this money cash, but if I have to invoice you, I've got to add 20% VAT. Then that's wrong and illegal, but actually you're quite happy to do that because you want to save the £1,000 it's going to cost you. But if you as a charity trustee do that, and then HMRC become aware of it, maybe because someone's complained, wants to make it difficult for your charity, you will have no defence, and you will probably be fined by HMRC, and the Charity Commission would expect the trustees to contribute to those fines, not to come out of the charity's coffers. So it's very, very rare that that's going to happen, but you just need to be aware of that. So ways to minimize the risk: know what's being done in your name. As I said, trustees are equally responsible and liable. So if someone's gone off to represent the charity, you need to know what they're saying. And this includes the chair. Quite often I've come across a chair who basically says, I was elected by the membership, and therefore I've got the democratic accountability to go off and do so and so, or to say so and so. No, that's not the way. They're accountable to the trustees. So actually, bring them to book if they're doing a bit of UDI. Have clear policies and procedures. Again, said that a couple of times. And always act honestly and reasonably within your governing document, and seek professional advice when needed. So hopefully that just summarises a couple of things I've said through the evening so far. As long as you honestly, hand on heart, feel that you've acted honestly and reasonably, and you can have these bits of records behind you, like your minutes and policies and procedures, you will be protected. I've already mentioned about insurance being an important way of minimising financial risk. So, always regularly review the insurance you have in place. Honestly talk to your broker about what you're doing, particularly if you start doing something new, so that an insurance company doesn't have the wriggle room that they didn't know you were doing this and therefore weren't going to insure you. And then there's the whole thing about incorporation. You'll get a handout about this, but actually nearly all of you here tonight, I think, are incorporated. Actually, I didn't know about the British Jewish Support Services because I didn't know you were coming, so I didn't have a look to see what sort of organisation, legal structure you are. So most charities end up either being a charitable company like Can and Hammersley Homes and Dorset Volunteer Centre, or the new incorporated beast on the block is CIO, Charitable Incorporated Organisation, which is a bit like a company, but it's only a charity can be a CIO, and that makes the charity a separate legal entity from the trustees. Unfortunately, Merley Community Association is what's called unincorporated association, so you aren't incorporated. So that means that the charity trustees are basically treated as a partnership of individuals. So in fact, you have unlimited legal and legal liability. So Nina might talk about that when I talk to you about the conflict of interest and about the potential dangers of that. Okay. But incorporation means that, you know, if your charity gets in debt, then as long as nobody can show that you built up that debt knowingly, you don't have to pay it. The same way that all the companies like Wilco and so on go down the tubes, owing money left, right, and centre. Then those creditors, the people they owe money to, basically can whistle in the wind. You know, they won't have any comeback really. And also any court action will always be against the charity. It won't be against the charity trustees. So that's for most of you here tonight, or nearly all of you tonight, you're fine. That's an easy way of limiting the liability on individual charity trustees. But the H9 and 10 will give you a bit more information about that. Phew. So basic principle. Who can remember what the basic principle is? Oh, someone can be brave.
Working for the benefit of the beneficiaries. Well, no, that's not right. Working for the benefit, you know what I mean. Working for the benefit.
Yeah, always act in the best interest of
in the best
of the-
interest
the
of
best
the
interest
charity.
of the charity and beneficiaries. Yep. Okay. So here we go. So, you know, hopefully you've seen so far that that's what I've been unpicking, and that's how you can demonstrate it, right? And it's the detail. But if you knowingly act in the best interest of your charity or legally, you will be liable. So every now and again you see cases. They don't very often get onto the main media, but they certainly do in the sort of charity type press, like civil society and third sector, for instance. So a charity treasurer basically was found guilty of embezzling over £200,000 out of his charity, and basically he's been sentenced to a jail term. So that's been done obviously through the police and through the criminal justice system. But also the Charity Commission has banned him for 15 years from either being a charity trustee or a senior employee of a charity. So, you know, basically the Charity Commission, when it does get involved, it will go the whole way, basically. And I said earlier about a key quality is having the courage sometimes to ask a seemingly stupid question, quite often because you'll probably find that there's somebody else around the table or in the room or on the Zoom meeting had exactly the same question in mind, and they're really glad that you were brave enough to ask it. And quite often it is a relevant question, and actually it's quite good to be that critical friend. And you often use that phrase, that being a charity trustee is quite often being a critical friend, asking, you know, why and how and when and so on, are quite useful to make sure that you stay on the straight and narrow. The Charity Commission have this sort of 15 questions that trustees should ask, not all the time. They're good prompts, you know, maybe across the year, and some are more relevant than others. Like some of you won't have endowments, but, you know, do we have adequate safeguards in place to prevent fraud? What's our policy on reserves? Are we an effective trustee body? Are we financially strong enough to continue to provide services for our beneficiaries? So there are these top level questions, which is I'm now going to go on to, about actually governance and management. Again, when you get this the slides, there'll be a hyperlink to this this infographic on the Charity Commission website. So I think it's about being curious. You as trustees, curious about what the trustee's doing, how you're doing it, who you're working with, how you're working with them, how we're looking after the money, where's it coming from, how are we spending it, is it the best way of spending it, who are we working with, who should we be working with, all those sorts of questions, basically, so you're trying to make your charity as effective and as efficient as possible. So you're getting as many bangs for your bucks, the maximum amount of public benefit from everything that you own and use. So being an effective trustee, have copies of key documents. I've already mentioned the Constitution, but there will be other things as well. 11A will have a sort of set of those. And it's about being an active trustee. It's being a participant. So you actually prepare for meetings, you think about things, you take a view, you ask questions, you get involved in a bit of a debate, and you make an active decision. You don't rubber stamp stuff. So you're not there as a prisoner. I guess sometimes, you know, trustees become there because, you know, they don't want to let the charity down, or because they were asked by Fred to be a charity, they don't want to upset him by actually leaving, whereas you feel, actually, I don't think I'm doing very much, or I can't contribute very much. So don't stay if you feel you're there because you feel you have to be there, and definitely don't be there by being a passenger. You know, just being there at the meetings, you don't do anything, you don't contribute anything, you're just warming the seat, or maybe even worse, just there for the kudos so you can put it on your CV. And the reason for being an active trustee, a participant, is if things go wrong, because you'll be equally liable and responsible for it. So you can't say, oh, I didn't go to that meeting, or I didn't say anything for that about that decision. That won't wash, right? Quite a good question is, will this help us deliver our charitable purposes in the best way? Okay, I've said at the beginning, you know what your charitable objects are. So ask that question is, can you do it? And then the next question is it the best way? Can we get as much public benefit out of it? And this is sometimes a good question to ask of services or things you've been doing for 3, 5, 10, 20 odd years. You know, is it still the best way of doing it? Is it still the best way of meeting the need? Just because it's going well and isn't broke, you know, why fix it? You need to be a bit more challenging of how your charity operates. And it's about keeping the big picture in mind. And this is where I'm going to go on to governance and management very quickly. You'll get a handout, unpick some of these. So being an effective trustee, it's about governance, and it's about making sure things happen, and not management, which is making things happen. So a very subtle difference. So the second one is actually the doing, whereas the governance is checking that the doing has been done. So you are that critical friend. You know, you will delegate some of the doing to people. It could be individual trustees to go off and do it, like to fundraise, to go and talk to X or Y, to go and represent the charity at something, and then checking that it's being done. And then the management is making things happen. So you might decide, we're going to run a fundraising fair. What we'll do is, you know, Eli and Jonathan and Angus will, as trustees, you'll go and find some other volunteers. You'll go off and have a working party. You'll plan the event, and then you'll come and tell us about how well it's gone. And that's governance. The management bit is when that working group comes together and has its own meetings and does things. If you have staff, then obviously there's an awful lot more delegation of the day-to-day stuff. And you might actually delegate all the day-to-day management to someone like a manager or a chief exec, or whatever role you want to call them. But that delegation is very clear and in writing. It's very clear about what they can and cannot do and how they report back to the trustees. So if you look at what governance is about, it's about setting and monitoring strategic aims and direction. Where do we want to be in the next 2, 3, 5 years? What are our priorities and how are we going to get there? Ensuring there's strong management of its money, assets and reputation. So again, that's making sure there are policies and procedures in place to look after your money, assets and reputation, and that there are effective systems, safeguards and controls in place. So you need to set up a framework, a way of doing things, and make sure everyone in the charity knows about it, and then get reports on how well that's working, and definitely get reports when things have gone wrong. Depends how big a screen you're looking at here. If you're on a phone or you might look quite small, but you'll get this again as part of one of the handouts. I think this is quite a good sort of subtle way of showing the difference between governance and management. So governance is a trustee role. Management will be like staff and volunteers who go away and do the day-to-day doing. And I understand that for some small organizations, the trustees will also be active volunteers, but you need to recognize that you have two hats. One is a charity trustee. So when you're in the trustee meetings, you do everything on the left-hand side. Whereas if you're going off doing the bookings or doing the bookkeeping or being a volunteer counsellor or running around delivering food to stuff, you're a volunteer in the same way as any other volunteer is in the organisation. So there's a few things of good practice here. So it's good to have a good role description for a trustee in any role you have, like treasurer or chair. And if you want to have a code of conduct, so it's clear about the expected behaviour of your trustees. So there's some handouts there to unpick that. You know, you don't have to always have it, but it's just some things to think about. Make sure that any new trustee gets good induction. I've been a charity trustee all my life. Sometimes it has been, you know, sink or swim. Okay, you become a trustee, come to your first meeting, and you sit there at the end of it, think, what was all that all about? What, you know, then you need to you know, ease people in, give them a lot of support and information. Maybe have an idea of like a buddy system, you know, an experienced trustee with a new trustee to help, you know, so they can ask those questions maybe outside the meeting. Think about looking at skills audit, of identifying what skills are missing from your trustees, and then go out and actively recruit for them. And then the old high idea of appraisal and training. Now, again, you know, smaller charities, this looks like it's too complicated. That's fine, but just think about what you can and cannot do. Certainly, bigger charities ought to be doing more of this, and the expectation is that it will be happening. If you can, maybe sometimes try and have some time away from your usual meetings. It doesn't have to be a day. It could be a 2-hour meeting where you just don't do your normal agenda, where you might look at the big picture stuff. You might look at your constitution to see if it's still fit for purpose. You know, I've worked with a charity in the last few years where their constitution was set up in 1956. It's never been changed. It's completely not fit for purpose. And looking maybe at whether your charitable objects are still fit for purpose, still relevant, but certainly what your aims and priorities are. There are some tools you could use. There's the hallmarks of effective charity, which is something that the Charity Commission sort of mothballed, but it's still there in the website. And it's just sort of like six key questions for you to think about how effective you are as a charity trustee and as a board. The good governance, the Charity Good Governance Code, is a big beast. It was put together by a number of umbrella bodies, including our own national organisation, NAVCA, of actually what good charity governance looks like. But when you look at it, there's an awful lot there. The thing is, though, that the Charity Commission expects you to do it, and if not, to explain why you don't do it. There's nothing, it unpicks an awful lot of what I've done tonight, but it could be useful as a tool to ask yourself, you know, are we the best charity board of trustees that we can be? And actually, one thing I will send you as a link is that the Directory of Social Change actually have an online survey that you can get your charity trustees to fill in individually, and it produces a nice little report that asks questions. So I think I'll make a note to myself that I'll get Bethan to add that, and you could use that maybe for your own charity board. Looking at the charity ethical principles is sometimes quite good about actually how you make decisions. Oh, the governance app, I have put it there at the bottom. God, dear. I'm better than I thought. So the governance app there, that is the Directory of Social Change app. So you do that, download it, and you can send a link off to every charity trustee. Very good tool to use, I think, if you want to do something around the Charity Governance Code. There are some quality standards and schemes. Trusted Charity Essentials is basically an online survey. Again, you fill in and it comes back with a little report. If you want to pay up to about $2.5 grand, you can do Trusted Charity. It's like other quality standards that some people might be about investors in people, for instance, being a very common one. So where you'll get an auditor who will come and look at something and then award you something or not. The Charity Excellence Model is a free tool. that you can look at. And again, it will come, you answer questions about how you run your charity, and it will come up with a report of strengths and weaknesses. We do an organizational health check. So we do surveys and look at desktop stuff, and also have interview with some of your trustees and staff, and come up with, again, a report about strengths and weaknesses. Actually, none of you are people looking to be a trustee, but I think this is useful for you as trustees when you're looking to recruit trustees, is that maybe you should have answers to these questions for anyone who's thinking of being a charity trustee. So anyway, you'll get this as a handout as well. But I think that's a sort of good thing to remind yourself about what it should be. Right. We've got to the end of my blurby bit. Any final questions? Wow. Either you're now all experts, or you feel so full of stuff that you just want to get away and rest. But yes,
I do have a question. It's
Good.
Claire here. It was just around that thing where you can be a charity and an incorporated company in some way.
Charitable company.
Yeah, so you can be registered as a charity, but you can
Yeah.
also be incorporated
Yeah.
as a CIO or something else.
Yeah.
In terms of the roles and responsibilities and liabilities of the trustee, the charitable trustee, do you
Yeah.
have any liability or responsibility to the company side?
Ah, right, okay. So because I can't see who you are.
Sorry, it's
Where
Claire.
are
I
you
just put
from?
my video on.
Which charity are you part of?
Dorchester Community Plays.
Oh, okay, right, okay. Well, you're a CIO, so you're a charitable incorporated organisation, because I looked up everybody before tonight. Which, so basically, in the past, if you wanted to limit the liability on trustees, the only option you had was to become a charitable company. So you registered as a company, then you got charity status. So CAN is a charitable company. Some of the other charities here that are a bit older are also charitable companies. So yes, so the trustees, not only are they charity trustees, they're also company directors, and therefore they need to also carry out their duty as a company director. Thing is, though, is that actually I always say, well, actually, if you're being a good charity trustee, you will tick the box for being a company director. And there is no real difference between the two, and responsibility and liability. If you are a charitable company, you not only have to report to Companies House, you also have to do reports to Companies House, as well as the Charity Commission. But generally what you do is you do your reporting as you would to the Charity Commission, and you send a copy off to the Companies House, because it more than meets their requirements. But you as a CIO don't have to do that, because that was always the complaint, was that for you to be incorporated and to give that protection to charity trustees, you had to do that sort of twin responsibility, twin reporting. So CIOs were brought in to basically mean you only have to report to the Charity Commission, and you only have a responsibility as a charity trustee.
Okay, thanks.
So in a sense, you don't have to worry about it. If you're interested a bit more about, the implication of being a charitable company, then, maybe get in touch with me and I can talk about it in a bit more detail. Does that make it clear for some of those organisations here tonight that some of you are charitable companies and some of you are CIOs? Well, nobody's asking a question, so I assume that that's okay. Any other questions? Nope. Okay, right. We've got a final few slides. Time to evaluate. Bethan, are you still here? No. Okay, right. Let me just I've got to. I'm going to put an evaluation form in the chat. It'd be great if you could do online. It'll take you about a minute. So if you could each of you just click on that? I guess BJSS, there's three of you around, so do a collective one.
How do we get to it? It's
so you
not
just click
showing
on the chat in the chat box.
in the chat box. Okay.
Has it popped up on your screen? If
Oh,
not,
yeah.
just go to chat.
Chat. You can tell how techie we are.
Don't worry, we've all been there.
Chrome.
We're doing this on a tablet, which is a bit more fiddly.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay,
we're
okay,
in,
yes,
we're in.
we're in. So you want us to do this
Yeah,
now or
yeah,
later on?
if you do it now, I'll give you a couple of minutes. It won't take you very long. I know you might have to
Thank
decide amongst yourselves, I suppose, rather
Thank
talk
you.
about it. But you know, if you could just take a couple of minutes, and then there are a couple more
Yep.
slides to finish off.
Thank you.
Can't do it at the same time. No. Which of the following areas? BCP. Where did you hear about this session? Can email. Do what it moderate. Is it expanded our knowledge and moderate
Yeah.
amount?
I think we can all hear you. So if you want to mute yourself.
Well, I'm not sure I can do that and do the
Okay.
question at the same time and still be online.
No, the questionnaire has completely
Superseded.
overridden any of our controls.
Oh, has it? Oh dear. Okay,
Yeah,
we don't. If you're having problems, get out
no,
of
no,
it.
we're okay. We're in the questionnaire, but we can't interact.
Oh,
with
okay. All
the
right. I'm fine.
online
Okay. Yeah.
Meeting
Good.
at the same time.
Okay.
Not on a tablet anyway.
Okay. Hopefully people have had time to do that. You'll get an email with a link to it if you haven't managed to fill it in. So basic principle. What's the basic principle?
Always act in the best interest of your charity and its beneficiaries.
Okay, right. Okay, so there you go. So hopefully you've got that. Help and support. Well, obviously, you know, we're here. I keep on reiterating that. You know, we're here funded to give free advice and support to groups. So use us. My contact details you've already got. If your charity is based across the border in Dorset Council area, then this is Becky's contact details. Obviously, at the end of the day, Charity Commission is the oracle on most things. It is a huge site. I'm on it nearly every day, and I find it difficult to navigate around. I would generally, they've tried to improve it actually about a month ago by trying to put all relevant documents together. But I still think it's easier to just put in search engine. put charity commission and then put something like, conflict of interest or appointing trustees or changing our constitution, and probably it will pop up that way. Much quicker way of doing it. I've already talked about that the 5-minute guides are very good as a good starting point for trustees to, for new trustees to learn what their duties are, but also as a good reminder. NCVO have quite a lot of good stuff. That's quite a lot of it's free, some is for members only, but actually there's quite a lot of on the free part of the website. NCVO is the sort of national body for voluntary organisations in England and Wales. If you're looking for one book, the Directory of Social Change has the Charity Trustees Handbook. You can get hard copies for £17 plus postage and packing, whereas for 12 quid you'll get a PDF sent by email. Obviously has the advantage then it's probably easier to share around a board of trustees than maybe a book might be. And all of you are members, so I don't need to talk to you about membership, I don't think. As I said before, you should get an email in the next couple of days from Bethan. So that will include a copy of these slides, some of the handouts that are referenced throughout it, and then a link to the recording of tonight that you're happy for you to obviously share amongst your trustee board. And also then a link to the trustee survey that we're doing, which we've launched yesterday and going to be running for the next couple of weeks. As I said, also encourage other trustees that you have in your organisation to fill in. My final slide is, tonight was to give you a sort of idea, a whistle-stop view about roles and responsibilities, and it's not to put you off. I think as long as you have that basic principle all the time, you'll be fine. Some of the detail is useful for you to know, dotting the I's and crossing the T's, but also is useful sometimes to pull up bad practice by some of your trustees, that actually you can better control them, contain them by saying, actually, we can't do it this way because this is what the Charity Commission expects. This is what charity law expects. This is what Steve Place says is you've got to do. That's a good way of actually keeping everyone on the straight and narrow. But at the end of the day, enjoy being a charity trustee because you're there to help make a difference, to improve lives, to improve the environment, or whatever your charity is trying to make a difference about. That's why you're there, and that's why you're giving your time and energy. So with that, thank you very much, everyone. That's the end of tonight. And as I said, you'll get this email. Come back to me if you've got any individual questions.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.